Hi, this is Sarah Lang, and this is my video narrative for PT 530, Psychosocial Aspects of Health and Disability. And this is my narrative about what I thought in my experience at the Museum of Disability, which is right down the street, Main Street in Amherst. It was a really cool experience, like no museum I've ever been to before. The exhibits were organized kind of starting with the farthest back history of how people with disabilities have been treated and kind of the different institutions and processes they went through to get help and get assistance or lack thereof in certain areas. So initially I was pretty shocked at the way that people with disabilities were treated way back in, ancient times. It's interesting to me because I feel like it was one extreme or the other. Either people were treated as a gift because they were different, or they were treated as kind of a punishment, like they had done something to anger God and then they had a child who ended up having a disability. And so I find that very interesting that different cultures saw that in different, kind of a different light. And what really got me were a lot of the religious paintings. So seeing Madonna with a child, and then different photos of Jesus with children. And I never noticed before that the children depicted did resemble like a child with Down syndrome. And the reason being is that they've always said that children with Down syndrome are they're regarded as innocents because it's hard for them to get into trouble, and I found that very interesting. I'd never noticed that in the pictures before, but then once I saw it, I definitely saw it, and so I thought that was something interesting that I'd never learned before about kind of that role in religion. And next I kind of went on to institutions and kind of how different leaders in history brought kind of help and assistance to those with disabilities. Some of the big advocates for kind of like taking them out of poorhouses. It sounded like at first everyone was kind of lumped together. So it was people who were poor, people who had alcoholism, people with drug problems, and then they kind of also lumped in people with disabilities. It's almost like they weren't sure what else to do with them. They didn't kind of have organized care facilities or anything like that, so anyone that couldn't take care of themselves, they just kind of put all in one spot without even kind of trying to get them in the most independent place that they could be. And another thing I thought was interesting was that some of these places I feel did have very good intentions. Some of them had them on a really productive schedule where they would get up early, they would eat, and then they would do different classes and things like that. They would do music and reading, or more vocational things, like the girls would do like housework or laundry and cooking and things like that, and the guys would do more manual labor to kind of prepare them for being able to be productive in society and contribute and make money for themselves, make a living. And other places seemed like it was just kind of there's no other way to put it, but almost acted as like a dumping ground where when the family couldn't take care of them, or they were orphans, or they just didn't even know what to do, they would bring them to these places, and it just seemed like a place with a bunch of beds, and if they got up, they got up, but nobody was going to make them, and there wasn't really any specialized therapy services. And then I think one thing I thought was really interesting was the Erie County poorhouse. I had never heard of it before, and I didn't even realize it was right down the street. And I was so interested in it that I looked up a little bit more information about it. And a few years ago, they actually published, it was a student newspaper from UB, that they actually found skeletal remains and coffins underground at the University of Buffalo, 300 human bodies buried under Clement Road on UB South Campus. And they think that some of the residents at the Erie County Poorhouse, which used to be where UB South Campus is now, these residents may not have had families, or the authorities that worked there had no way to get a hold of them, so that when they passed away, they just buried them right on site. And so they either didn't keep a record of who was buried at the site, or they never gave the record to UB, and when the land was granted to the UB, the University of Buffalo, for when they had their first campus, they didn't know where the cemetery was, so they just knew it was somewhere on the grounds, and they didn't really have any direction on how to avoid it. So when they were building new classrooms, I guess they archaeologists excavated the remains and took them to the Forest Lawn Cemetery. So that was a little interesting tidbit. I didn't even know, I had never heard of the Erie County Poorhouse before, so I definitely looked up some more information on that after I had left the museum. Another thing I found really interesting was how many of these places there were. I believe they said there was one in Syracuse, there was one in Newark, Newfane. There were several places with institutions, and some actually started having like physical therapy services. There were some that were specialized for like children with cerebral palsy, and I really enjoyed seeing the pictures of like the kids walking in the parallel bars, and the language still threw me off. Like some of the things that they would call children with disabilities. So I thought that was like imbeciles and kind of other pretty derogatory terms. I was really surprised, and you know, the tour guide warned us ahead of time, but it still shocked me, and I wonder what things we say now that in the future we're gonna look back and be like, I can't believe people used to use that word to describe someone, or if we're at that place now where we're at a more acceptable. I think with people first language we've come a long way, but I'm still wondering what kind of advancements we'll make in like the language of disability. Another thing I thought was really cool was the Invacar, which was a really small vehicle. It was actually only had 3 wheels, and it was adapted for use. I think it was originally, he said, for veterans that had come back from the war and with a disability, and they've taken them off the road since then, but it's really cool that the Museum of Disability was actually able to get one of these cool little cars. I guess people are driving them too fast, and they couldn't trust people to obey the laws anymore. So, really cool little car though, and it was all because of one person wanting to, I think it was for their brother, they wanted to make a car so that they could get around, and then it just really caught on. And that they could actually lease them from the government as part of their disability benefit. I just read that on the internet. I thought that was really interesting. Another exhibit that I saw that kind of brought me back to my medical ethics class days was the Willowbrook part of the exhibit. I remember hearing about Willowbrook, and it was a big debate in medical ethics because it was like the hepatitis study, and a lot of people said that, you know, the argument for it was that they thought the benefits outweighed the potential harms because and they said that researchers did not expose the children to greater risks than those they would have otherwise been exposed to. So they didn't think there was any excessive risk because they said about 30 to 50% of the children that came in were contracting hepatitis within their first year there. And they chose they say they chose Willowbrook for the study because of the high level of hepatitis, not because they were, quote, not because the children were mentally disabled. However, they kind of, basically the biggest issue here was that they violated fairness and respect for people, and that they kind of were almost maybe coerced into it because they were given like a special spot in the new part of the facility if they participated in the research, and they were given the hepatitis virus, and that they weren't really informed about the risks of the study. They also said that maybe they should have done it on adults in the facility instead of children, because adults might have been able to understand the risks better about the study they participated in. And the parents seemed like they were getting induced to give their consent because it was an overcrowded place and they would get a spot. And they just basically said that it's not appropriate to use a vulnerable population for experiments, and deliberately infecting them with the disease doesn't respect their kind of rights as a person. So I thought that was really interesting because I had kind of not thought about that study in a while, and it was kind of a good reminder of to keep my medical ethics thinking hat on. So when I'm interacting with patients in the future, or if I'm doing any kind of research, it's kind of always remembering that respect for persons, and that will definitely always overshadow any kind of benefit that we might get from research. If it's going to harm others, then it's not worth it, and there's got to be another way to study it. So that'll definitely reflect in my future career. One other thing I thought was kind of interesting, there's this place called Randall's Island. It seems like it's off, it's kind of near Manhattan, New York City, and most of the island seems to be parks now, like athletic fields and playgrounds, but it used to be, it used to have asylums, hospitals, cemeteries. Now it does still have psychiatric hospitals and some other things and homeless shelters, but it's interesting because all these people were so close to the city, but they're kind of isolated. So it's kind of those things where being separate isn't necessarily equal. And it's almost like in the past, people with disabilities have been segregated, much like people have been segregated because of race in the past. And so, I don't know, I just feel like the museum definitely opened my eyes to a lot of things that I hadn't thought about before. I didn't realize how populous these institutions were. And it just kind of makes me thankful for how far we've come in, treating people with disabilities and really pushing them to their potential, because it seems like they used to kind of just leave them. They didn't think they had any potential. They didn't think they could get better. And now we have so much that we can do for these people, and it makes me excited to be able to use these patient care skills that I'm learning now and strategies to be able to work with people who do have disabilities and show them that they can achieve things, they can, make improvements, they can get stronger, they can get keep as much independence as possible in their activities of daily living, and maybe just kind of instilling some of that independence and hope and respect into parents and especially caregivers, hoping that they show the same respect to their children and people that they're taking care of. And I'm sure we can learn from them as well, since they're with them the majority of the time. But just, I think another thing that I realize being at the Museum of Disability is that in the future I'll definitely be very careful to use my person first language and to truly be cognizant of the people that I'm around, and to be respectful at all times in any kind of discussion, because they're people too, and they deserve the same respect as everyone else. And so, not that I didn't know that before, but it's always a good reminder. And we've come pretty far, but I still think that we can make a lot of improvements in both the language and treatment of people with disabilities. And so I look forward to furthering that in our profession and hoping to carry that over into my patient care skills. So I was really glad that I got to experience the Museum of Disability, and hope you enjoyed this video. Thanks for watching!